Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody out to our Wednesday evening service. And if you'll grab a book, we're going to sing 635. 635. God forgave my sin in Jesus' name. I've been born again in Jesus' name. And in Jesus' name I come to you to share his love as he told me to. He said, freely, freely you have received, freely, freely give. Go in my name, and because you believe, others will know that I live. All power is given in Jesus' name, in earth and heaven, in Jesus' name, and in Jesus' name I come to you to share his power as he told me to. He said, freely, freely you have received, freely, freely give. Go in my name, and because you believe, others will know that I live.
Good morning, y'all. No, it is not morning. It is evening. Good evening. Hope everybody's doing well today. I asked Jackie for 2 songs, but I didn't get what I wanted. That happens in life. Good. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. All right, you're stuck with me one more time. This is the last time, right, Russell? Okay. Russell paid me $50 to teach tonight. Just kidding, he didn't do that. All right, we're going to continue where we left off. If you haven't been here for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about perceptions of God in the Old and New Testament and how there's been an unfortunate, I don't say trend or idea that's existed that the God in the Old Testament is somewhat different than the God in the New Testament. And the God in the Old Testament is mean and harsh and judgmental and tough, and the God in the New Testament is nice and merciful and loving and kind. And we've been trying over the last few weeks to kind of dispel this myth and make sure we understand that God is God. And he is who he is. He has the same attributes throughout history, throughout the Old and the New Testaments. Yes, he is holy and just and executes judgment, and he's also loving and kind and perfectly merciful to the point that he sends his own son to die for us. So he has both of those, and those are always fully expressed throughout both testaments. So I'll skip over a bunch of what we talked about last time. Get to where we were at. But we covered a lot of God's love in the Old Testament, which sometimes people miss, and we'll talk about why people miss that a little bit tonight. And then we talked about the New Testament, where we do see judgment in the New Testament, and we do see a little bit of severity. We do see, of course, the love and the kindness of Christ and him coming and sacrificing himself, but that doesn't excuse anything else. And we finished with saying that in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, we have this idea of God, which is consistent in that he cannot accept sin, he is perfectly just, and he executes judgment, okay? He wouldn't be God if he wasn't like that, okay? I can't imagine a God who can tolerate sin, because if he can tolerate sin, then that impairs his lovingness, right? We see this, I don't like to get political, but you can see this sometimes where people who have committed crimes, let's say like a horrific crime, there's a place for mercy in certain areas, but too much mercy in some of those instances is cruelty to victims, right? You might see somebody who's been arrested multiple times for violent offenses. We've seen this on the news before. And they're let out again, and somebody gets killed or hurt, sexually assaulted because of that. That was not kindness. That was not love to withhold justice in that case. Does that make sense? So we need a God who can be perfectly just, who can set a standard and hold to it, and who cannot tolerate sin. Because, as we talked about one of the other times, our sin does not only impact us. If I start sinning, if I start causing problems, if I start using drugs, if I become an alcoholic, that affects me negatively, but it's also going to negatively affect my wife and my children, maybe my neighbors, maybe the people I work with at work. It's going to spread like ripples in a pond. If I become unsatisfied in my marriage and decide to go chase after other women, right? I'm hurting myself, but I'm also hurting that person. I'm hurting my wife. If we divorce, I'm devastating my kids probably. It's gonna have all these ripples, and who knows what kind of after effects that's gonna have. Nothing we do impacts just us. It spreads out. We talked about that before too. Americans have this very individualistic notion that I can do whatever I want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. And that's really simplistic. A lot of the things we think of don't necessarily hurt somebody in that moment that we can see, but they have serious effects later that really do cause problems. All right, so getting back on topic. God is perfectly holy. He can't accept sin, but he's also perfectly loving. And throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament, he gives repeated opportunities for people to repent. He doesn't want anybody to perish, says in the New Testament. He's willing that all should come to him. So he consistently gives opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. We saw this, I think, most vividly in the story of the Israelites and the Jews throughout the Old Testament. Rebellion, 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 sin, 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 sin. But every time, God welcomes them back, gives them another chance. Executes judgment, but brings them back, gives them another chance. And continues to watch out for them. And at the end, he's perfectly merciful. It'd be very easy for us to say, yeah, well, you say you're loving, you say you're nice, but, it's easy for you, you're God. Well, it's not easy when you come down and die and have that separation. I think Christ's cry on the cross of, my God, why have you forsaken me? I think that's really a more terrible thing than we can really imagine. God calling out to God, why have you forsaken? I don't know what is going on there, but it sounds like something horrific. But he's willing to do that for us, for our reconciliation.
Can I just say that
Yes, ma'am.
the good we do also has ripple effects?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, let me say that louder. So the good we do also has a ripple effect. Yes, thank you. I don't want to be too negative. That's also true. Yeah. So if you're a good mother and you're taking care of your kids and you're watching out and you're sacrificing yourself to help them and to help others, yeah, that's going to have a huge, can totally change their life growing up, and you've given them this wonderful model and template for their life, and so it can affect their kids, and just, yeah, it spreads out too. Thank you. It's a good counterbalance. All right, so with all that said, we've talked about what's in the text in the Old Testament and what's in the text in the New Testament, but now I want to talk a little bit about what people bring to the text, okay? Because it's not just what's there, it's how we read it and how we see it and what kind of assumptions and things like that we bring to it. By way of illustration, this week we were doing homeschooling, and we were in language arts. And this language arts curriculum we have also has these really nice paintings in it, and it brings that in every once in a while to try and encourage the kids to appreciate art and beautiful things, stuff like that. Kind of neat. So they had this very beautiful painting, and it's a wilderness painting, and it's kind of a pond, and there's trees, and there's some mountains in the background. It's clearly out in the wilderness, right? And the kids' assignment was to write a paragraph from two different perspectives about somebody who was in this situation. So the first person was going on a picnic with his family. And they had gone out to the mountains, and they brought their meal and their lunch, and they're with family, and they stumble upon this very picturesque scene. And so write a paragraph from their perspective talking about this, right? That was nice. The next one was a little different. It was the perspective of a hiker who had been out all day. Night was closing in. You can see in this painting the sun's slowly starting to set. He's lost. He has no idea where he is. Doesn't have any food. He doesn't have any shelter for the night. And he stumbles upon this, and he doesn't know where he's at. So you need to write a paragraph from this guy's perspective. Now, what's the difference in those two perspectives? It's not the actual scene itself, right? That's the exact same. So that picture was the exact same.
One of them's lost and one of them isn't.
Yes, one of them's lost and one of them's in it. What they brought to that picture is what changed, right? One of them knew what they were doing. They knew where they were going. They knew everything was fine. The other one doesn't know where they're going. They're lost. They're not there, okay? They're confused. So something can be the same, but our interpretation of it can differ based on our own circumstances and what we bring. Does that make sense? Okay. So with that said, I want to go on to the next page. And these, get a little cerebral here. Go. I want to talk a little bit about like what we call cognitive biases. I don't know if y'all have heard that term before. Did y'all hear that? What was that?
It's normal to sound system.
Weird. Okay. Sounds like a bee or a bird.
You get a rebirth for a while, and all of a sudden,
It is,
that's all.
yeah.
That was an audio bias.
Oh, there it is, an audio bias. Yeah, okay. Sometimes I want to make sure I'm not going. All right. So cognitive biases. These are common. We all have them. That's part. We're human. We're not perfect. We make mistakes both in what we do and in how we think sometimes. So we have these mental shortcuts, these ways that we kind of evaluate situations, and we try to do what kind of comes easiest, what comes quickest to mind. We don't often take something and very carefully, seriously, deliberately think about it. And that's okay. We couldn't do that all the time, right? There's a lot of things in life I don't need to think deeply about. I just need to do them. But there's other things where I may be stuck in a pattern and I may think about it instantly, where I really need to take a step back and consider it a little more carefully. I see this all the time with like my kids, right? So there may be a time when they're like whining about something, and it can be this is my feeling, my tendency to be like, okay, knock it off, you're fine, let's go, you're good. And maybe that's true 80, 90% of the time. But 10% of the time it's not true. And so there's a lot of times where maybe I need to take a step back, slow down, okay, what's going on, and make sure I meet whatever need they have, right? But how we approach the text when we come to the Bible, how we approach it, just like in that painting, how we approach it matters. It changes what we take away from it, okay? We have to read it carefully. We have to read it logically. We have to read it with an open mind. We can't bring our own baggage and our own assumptions into it. And that's really hard to do because we all have our own assumptions, our own experiences. We can't ever just approach it completely neutrally just because of our own history, our life experiences, everything we've been taught. So we just have to be careful. I think one of the strengths of the Church of Christ perspective is that they want to do this. That's the ideal, is to go back to the text and see what the text says and go from that. So we want to do that. A few of these biases that can really impact our understanding of God in the Old Testament. The first one is what we call an availability bias. So that is where we judge events based on how easily they come to mind. Okay? You can think about this in like a secular setting. If you look at things like, I don't know, think about like a plane crash, right? If there's been a big plane crash recently, people will tend to think, oh man, plane crashes happen. We got to be really careful about those. Why? Because those things are very big events. They're actually extremely rare, but when they happen, they stick in our mind. They really come to mind a lot, and so we tend to overestimate how often those happen. It's the same thing with a lot of other violent crimes, things like that. We know about them, so we see them. The example of the ongoing protest, insurgency, whatever you want to call it, up in Minneapolis. People will say, oh man, there's a lot of like unrest going on. there is in that one place. But if you actually zoomed back and you look at a poll, or you look at actual data from the whole United States, that's a very, very small percentage of what's actually happening, right? But we see it more often. It's available information, so we judge it. So that comes here. Most people who are not Christian or who are kind of nominal Christians can name a lot of instances of God's justice. Those are very impactful events. 12 plagues, all the stuff that goes on in Canaan. Those are things that a lot of people who aren't Christian or who were Christian and changed and left the faith, they'll think about those things instantly. Well, you remember how God killed all those people and he let the Israelites make war on them, and oh man, then he flooded the whole earth and killed everybody. Those are what they come to mind. They think about that. What they don't think about as much is God's patience. And we talked about the other times how there were hundreds and hundreds of years where he was wanting people to repent, allowing them time for that, both in Canaan and in the early world before the flood. But those things don't come easily to mind, so they're not thought about. Does that make sense? So they're making a judgment without taking all that information in and carefully sorting it and giving it a fair treatment. Same thing, what's reported versus what is not. We see this all the time in our own life. You get the news, but the news isn't the news, right? I don't tell you everything that, if I'm a newspaper reporter, I don't tell you everything that happened during the day in all the country. That would be impossible. Couldn't do that. Even if I'm a local newspaper reporter, I can't tell you everything that happened in Santa Fe or Hitchcock or wherever during the day. I have to select. So what do I select? I select the nice story of, what's that? The bad stuff, yeah, yep, exactly. If Justin goes out and volunteers to come help somebody like me fix my light, I'm dumb on all that stuff, and he's a really good electrician, then that doesn't get reported, all right? But if Justin punches me in the face, well, you're going to see that, all right? Violent electrician attacks nice men. You wouldn't do that, though, would you?
It's also, as you wrote on Facebook the other day,
Okay.
what news source you're watching.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just from one perspective, it doesn't match at all what the other side said.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you're going to get different sides and different places reporting different things, which is why it's nice to look at both and kind of, see what everybody's saying. But yeah, sometimes it's really hard to know what's even true and what's factual and it's kind of messy. But not in the Bible. The Bible tells us what's there, and so it's up to us to read it fairly and look at what's reported and look at what's not. I think Judges is a great example of this. Terrible stuff in Judges, man. I mean, it's full of violence and hard things going on, and just there's a lot of just rough things are happening back then. But those are the things that were, how do I say it? Not newsworthy. They were the important things that writers wanted to show, how the Israelites or different people were failing. They were important events that were happening. The other important events, too, are the 40 years of peace between the judges. There's some messy thing, and then there's 40 years of peace, or 20 years of peace, or whatever. But that's reported, but it's not given the same amount of space, right? Because what are they going to say? There was peace this day, there was peace this day, that could go on for books and books and books. So we don't see that. So we have to pay attention. What is reported, what's not? And remember to balance those things out. Next one is called a cultural bias. We talked about this briefly, but you can't judge ancient people and events through this 21st century American lens. It's so silly. It's like we're at the top of this tree that's been growing for millennia, and we look down at kind of the trunk and we're like, why are they doing stuff like that? Well, they're doing stuff like that. We know better because we have the benefit of retrospective history, of building on all their morals, the things that God has given us. We have the whole Bible, which many people didn't have until very recently. We have so much more information and so much more to go off of than they did back then, and so we can't judge them through the same lens. God's actions were necessary. God has a purpose. God knows what he's doing. He does certain things at certain times and places and cultures and contexts because he has a big plan mapped out. And we have to respect that. Now, we also talked about the individual versus a community good. So what's always good for the individual is not always the highest priority. And I don't know we get really offended by that. You mean what? I have to sacrifice myself for that? You can see that right now in a lot of the things we do in our culture. I think particularly with, you see it like with abortion. There's a whole section of the population, both men and women, who think if I have a baby, that's going to inconvenience me. It's going to make my life harder. I'm going to have to sacrifice and work. I don't want to do that. I don't deserve that. So let's get rid of it.
So, it's funny, that kind of tweaks something I was teaching somebody today about in the insect world, you know, the things, the behaviors and the biologies and such. And, you know, the one thing like ants do, um, they will, when it comes to foraging, they send the oldest ones out the furthest distances, um, and they do it because they're expendable.
Mm.
And they're not told to do it. They just biologically know that my sacrifice would be best made if it was me doing it because I'm the oldest and the others would live longer.
Huh.
And that's how the animal world works. They don't question why you you do things out of sacrifice. They
Uh-huh.
just do it.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's funny how God gives us cues like this in nature, but we so often can't follow those things. And you know, you do this because it would be the best thing to do for the
Uh-huh.
greater good and such. But you know, it's amazing to see things like that in nature.
Yeah. Sometimes we have nice examples of that, but we don't take the cue. Yeah. It's really neat. It almost makes me feel bad about all the dead ants in our house after you came and sprayed. They all died, old and young.
They all got to go.
Yeah. He cleansed that house.
Brent, looks like we struggle with that sense of, and as we read about people in the Bible, of great individuals who had to rise above what their community was to do something for God, to do the right thing when no one else was. You know, when Elijah stood against 450 prophets of Baal, he did that, I don't want to say alone because he was God, but I mean, he had to make the choice, I as the individual am going to do this thing that is better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we struggle with the sense of, you know, it's kind of talk about politics or whatever. We're either one way or the other.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You either have to be individual or community.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as individuals, we shouldn't be letting the community make our choices for us.
Mm-hmm.
That we should be responsible and accountable to God for our individual thing. But then I get to the sense, when my individual thing just becomes selfishness, what do I get? What do I get?
Mm-hmm.
Then I lose the fact of what God really calls me to do, and that is to make the world around me better, to
Yeah.
make my brother's life better, to make everyone around me. Agape love is having a goodwill for people that don't deserve it
Mm-hmm.
or haven't done anything to earn it from you.
Yeah.
And so I think we struggle with the idea, I need to do what's right as the individual. And sometimes it may mean I have to stand alone
Mm-hmm.
to do so, but I need to do what's right. And if I do what's truly right according to God, I will bless my community.
Uh-huh.
And then I need to become a part of that community that is that piece of the body
Mm-hmm.
that gets in there, and I do my role that fits in with everybody else's, so we can be the family of God and expand it out. And I think we just really struggle with that, going back and forth, because we haven't really focused on just do God's will,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and He'll take care of both.
Yeah. 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 That's a hard thing to do, and you have to be very intentional about it because it doesn't come naturally.
Agreed.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And that's one of the times where we always have to be careful. Like, there's aspects of our culture that mesh really well with Christianity. You know, we came from a Christian background in many ways. You know, Americans are usually very fair and open, and they give opportunities, and there's a rule of law. Those are all really great things. But then when we get to the individualistic side, we just have to be very careful, because this pursuit of happiness thing is not bad in and of itself, but it can be taken too far. Whereas if you look in the New Testament, those guys don't have the greatest time, you know. Paul has a rough go of it. The disciples, based on what we know, have a rough go of it. It's constantly sacrificial. Jesus is sacrificial. So there's something higher they're pursuing, and they pay for it. You know, life doesn't always go that great for them. And the same in the Old Testament with a lot of the prophets. Some of them have a really rough time, you know. Hosea, my goodness. But they're doing that for the greater good. They're doing it to help others. And so where do you find that balance? Or is there even a balance? You just go all the way one way if you have the faith. That's hard. It's a difficult situation. All right, last one is negating the purpose or the audience. So people come to the Bible, they're reading it, but they forget that this was written for all people in all time. That's absolutely true. And also, certain letters and certain books and certain laws and stuff were addressed to certain people at specific situations. So they'll read parts of the Old Testament, for example, and they forget God has a ton of laws for the Israelites back then. A lot of these are very new things, and they seem harsh, and they seem strict, and we're like, what's going on? Why did he have to do that? Well, he's taking an ancient people who don't know anything about him, don't know anything about his structure, his holiness, anything like that, and he's building them up and giving them a set way to be. Not only for themselves, to train them up as they grow into what eventually becomes, when Jesus comes, the opportunity to become Christians, the Christian church, but he's also setting an example for the outside nations around them. And we talked about last time some of the really wonderful things that were in those laws. Like, go back to it repeatedly, take care of the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. This was stuff that was like revolutionary back then. And anybody could come into that community, and if they were going to play by the rules and obey God and be part of that community, they could do that. But you had to do what he said. It was a very unique thing that you would look out for people, orphans, widows, people who didn't have anything. So again, and that goes back to the community good as well. And God was playing that long game, right? God doesn't go moment by moment. God has the whole picture, and he's putting the pieces in place where they need to go so that everything could work out like it did. All right. Oh, and I was talking about that culture bias. There was one thing I was going to say. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the Chinese proverb, kill the chicken to scare the monkey. Hear that?
Just rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah, kill the chicken to scare the monkey, yeah. No, I don't know how you say it. But yeah, this idea that you set an example, right? You set an example so other people know better. Kill the chicken to scare the monkey. So maybe the chicken's pecking in the, I don't know what, I'm trying to think of a real life example. I didn't live in China back then, so I don't know. Maybe the chicken's pecking in the rice and the monkey gets some ideas. You take the chicken, you eat it, you don't waste it. But now the monkey's like, whoa, I'm not going to take that rice anymore. Anybody Chinese is watching and I'm totally butchering that, I apologize.
So when I Google,
Uh-huh.
because that's where all the answers are.
There you go.
It is a Chinese idiom meaning to punish an individual or make an example to someone to intimidate others into obedience.
Uh-huh. You set the example, yep. Yeah.
That's all it means.
Thank you.
I'm going to do this, and you're going to be scared, and then you're going to comply.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And I think it would behoove us to look back and think about the billions and billions and billions and billions of people who have read or heard about the stories in the Bible and the positive impacts that has had on their behavior, the way they treated others, the way they did things. I don't think we can, because we're not God. God knows, we don't know. We cannot even calculate the impact that has had, the impact for good that has had on people throughout the ages. Even in like the Middle Ages, when people had very limited access, they still heard basic stories. They could still realize the importance of like sacrifice for others or things like that. So we have all these examples in the Old Testament. And what is that? One of y'all, probably Russell knows, the verse where it says these things were written as an example for us.
Yeah,
Someone put you on. See? Who needs Google when you got Russell? Yeah. I was going to say it. I just want to make sure you knew it. So, you have these great examples. And even our kids, they read when they were little, they had that Action Bible. If anybody has grandkids or kids, man, that thing is awesome. So it's like a comic book Bible, which is not where they should end. They should start. They should move to the real Bible. But they would just read that for fun because it's like a comic book, and then they get all these great stories in their head and the examples that are set by those stories. And that's how people learn. I can tell you, don't kill somebody, or I can tell you a really good story about how somebody killed somebody and all the horrible things that happened afterwards. And the second one's going to stick with you much more, especially as a child. That's how kids learn. But yeah, so much good there. Some other biases I didn't put up here. There's one called confirmation bias, which is common. It's where we notice and accept the parts of a text or of a story or things that confirm what we already believe, but we just kind of discount or just rationalize away the other stuff that we don't like. So I think about, was it, one of y'all will know who's more of a history buff, was it Franklin? And Franklin went through the Bible and cut out the pieces he didn't like? Is that who it was? Jefferson? Okay. One of those guys. Yeah. So yeah, somebody snip. This part's great, this part's not. That's kind of a confirmation bias right there. I'm going to take what I like and ignore the rest. You can't do that. That's not fair. Anchoring bias. This is another one. Think about an anchor that you throw off a boat. Keeps you in place, right? So an anchoring bias is when we have an initial impression of something. So we read something, we see something, we get an idea about it, and then that shapes how we read everything else after that, okay? Whether for good or for bad. People don't tend to change their beliefs really radically all of a sudden. They tend to have this kind of anchor, and their beliefs kind of slowly shifts. This can be a really good thing to keep in mind when you have, teenagers or young people, and you feel like you're just wasting your breath telling them stuff, and they're not listening. They may be listening, and they may be kind of thinking about it, and they're not going to show you, but they're kind of slowly shifting and starting to kind of get what you're saying, and eventually they may get there.
I know it's hard to do from like the pulpit or things with the whole group. I got myself in a whole kind of mess teaching Bible class and making a comparison between the fact that during World War II, you may have thought about fearing people of German descent, but we gathered up people of Japanese descent that were Japanese Americans and put them into concentration camps. And the people that particularly had a heritage that reached back into that time frame, the fear of just admitting, hey, I may have thought about this wrong. And I think we do that with the Bible, that we only want to talk to people that agree with us. We never really want to have anything about what we believe challenged, which is a real good way to never know anything.
Yep.
But kind of like you're talking about, I guess we feel safe with what we're attached to, but we're afraid to be vulnerable. Well, one, we're all kind of afraid to be vulnerable. But if I let you tell me something that you've got what you believe is evidence for or whatever, then I might shape my own foundation. And of course, Russell's always after us to read our Bibles and study and things. But it's just kind of one of those things. We seem to have, as a people, a fear of having our own values and thoughts actually challenged, so that they can, because of course, then we don't grow.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's pretty common to most people. Most of us like to kind of have our own set thing that we know, when we know it, and we're going to look for that confirmation wherever we can find it. We don't want to have to deal with the outside because it's hard. It takes a lot of work, and it does challenge you, and sometimes it's threatening, for sure. But I always think, well, how strong is my faith if I can't do that, right? If it's that, doesn't mean I actively go out and look and try, but I'm open to it. I think one of the best things that happened to me was being over in like we talked about in the first lesson, being in Thailand and having coworkers who were atheist or agnostic, who were vocally so, but respectful. and to give me these books, and I think it impressed him that I was willing to read it, but to read something like Richard Dawkins' God Delusion, and there were, I would say most of it, I was like, there was a few points where I was like, oh, okay, wow, that's challenging, that's hard. So let me go research that and learn more about it. And that actually ended up really strengthening my faith and increasing it. So I realized there's good answers to all of these. And these are things, none of this is new. You know, in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. This stuff has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And so there's a lot there we don't have to be afraid of. But we should be open to it, if for no other reason than to strengthen our own faith and to help others. You're going to meet other people who come from different perspectives and backgrounds, and if you've never thought about this, how do you answer them? You know, it tells us to be ready to give an answer to all those who ask us about our hope, but I think also about questions they may have. Being able to help them, meet them where they're at.
One of the things that Brian teaches in Brown Trail School of Preaching is denominational doctrine, because how can they support what they believe from the Bible if they don't know what the opposing denomination believes?
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And so they debate it one side to the other.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I kind of wish we had more of those respectful debates. It would be. My grandpa had, before he passed, he had a bunch of books from the 50s, I think, and it would be like some Baptist or Methodist guy and some Church of Christ guy, and they would have a respectful debate on what this stuff was. I think that's very illuminating. I think helps us, okay, this is why we do this. Yeah. Another one, pretty common, this is, I know, this was their thing, is kind of negativity bias. We try to fixate on things that we dislike or we find offensive or we disagree with, and we overlook the broader argument or whatever else is going on there, right? We find the thing that we really can't stand, and that becomes our focus, and we kind of ignore everything else. One of my friends was very much like this with the Old Testament. He found the part about coming into Canaan just so horrible, and that was all he could see. Couldn't pull back and see the full picture. Anytime there's something that happens where it's a necessary thing, but there's some ugliness involved, or just something that we dislike, we can be susceptible to that.
I think a lot of people have a problem with the fact that there's a lot of things that God doesn't tell us directly what to do about certain things, and they kind of look at it as, why would he not address this?
Yeah.
And a loving God would tell us, don't do this behavior or whatever it was, and I think that's can be problematic for a lot of people because they look at it as almost abandonment in direction.
Yeah.
Where God, like you had mentioned earlier, God cherry picked or whatever you want to call it, certain selections of things that he wanted us to see in the Bible. And those things were meant to give us direction in every walk of life and every aspect of life. And, he didn't tell you the answer to every question on the planet, but he gave us as many examples of real life living examples as he could to give us direction on how to live and treat each other.
Yeah, yeah. God gave us exactly what we needed. And he also gave us the respect, and I think this is something that's a big responsibility, a burden on us actually, is that God respects us and expects as much of us that he wants us to find out a lot of things on our own and to go and pursue those. And just in a simple example is vocations, right? There's nothing in the Bible is not a textbook for every single thing in the world. It doesn't teach you how to be an electrician or pest control or fly airline. It doesn't give you all the details about even being a mother or a father. It gives you the principles, and God expects us to go and make wise decisions and find out more about this world that he's created. So yeah, there's a lot that's incumbent upon us as well. All right, lastly, in our last 5 minutes, just a few other considerations. One thing people often miss is they forget who God is and who we are. And they forget that there is this yawning, amazing, just incredible gap between those two things, all right? How are we to judge God? What standard do we even use? Where do we get these ideas of justice and love? People forget to consider that. How do I judge God? What standard am I going to use? My own standard, my personal standard? Okay, well, that's great. What if somebody else has a different standard? Which one of us is right? We have 30 different, 50 different people. They have 50 different standards. How do we know which one is right and which one's wrong? Is it all subjective? Is it all just our own personal feeling? Somebody says God is great, and I say, well, God's terrible. Well, who's right? We don't have any standard we can use. We need an objective, full standard. As Christians, the standard is God's judgment. If it aligns with who God is and what He teaches, it's right. If it doesn't, it's wrong. God is the one by who we know. God is the one who helps us understand what is right, what is wrong, what is love, what is justice, all these things. These come from, we stand on top of those things, so we can't use those kind of against God. Am I making sense? I'm not explaining this well.
Well, I think the example of in the Old Testament, the way God gave the Jews all of the rules to live by,
Mm-hmm.
and He told them to separate yourself from everybody around you. He tried that experiment, and it worked, but the Jews didn't follow it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it was a deal that he tried to show us that I can take care of you, but when you separate yourself from me, that's where this doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. When we separate from God, nothing works. And if you want the vivid example of this or the picture of this, you only have to look into the 1900s and see that communist, atheistic regimes arose in Russia and in China and in Cambodia, and the amount of people who died and were tortured and who suffered under those regimes eclipses every other thing that happened before that combined by an order of magnitude. Terrible. You go read the history of Russia, or especially China under Mao, just awful. Cambodia, like third, fourth of the population just slaughtered by their own people. And these were, in every case, these were atheistic regimes they were going to get free from God and these nasty rules of religion, and they were going to make this utopia. And no, human nature came out, and it was power, and people died. They rebelled, and this is what happened. And it's terrible. We don't have another ground to judge God on. God is the judge. We can't do that. We don't have another standard. He is the standard.
Brent?
Yes, sir.
Could we don't get to do this with God personally, but when we know that Job didn't sin in his difficult days of things, but then as you come down there to the end, and when God starts asking, where were you
Mm-hmm.
when I?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Who can do this
Uh-huh.
as I can?
Yeah.
Just that, if we ever get to that point ourselves to think, who am I to even question
Uh-huh.
God's decision
Mm-hmm.
on whatever that, because I think a lot of us just think God is a superman.
Yeah.
He's
Uh-huh.
Superman.
Yeah.
And that's with the same human struggles and things, but just think about God literally asking you, where were you when
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's so much higher and so much farther above us. Yeah. I would use the example of like a 2-year-old questioning you about how you run your house and pay for everything and do it, and that's absurd, right? But that's even a terrible example, because the gap between a 2-year-old and me is nothing compared. It's more of like an amoeba trying to judge, and I'm not. It's way bigger than that. So we're not there. Bouncing off of that, Romans 9:20. Who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Like the audacity and just the pride to think that we can not come to God with questions and struggles, which we absolutely can, but to think that we can condemn him or say that he was wrong. We don't have that knowledge. We're not there. And then finally, and this is one thing I always think is important to remember, our existence itself depends on God. There is no right to life. Some people think I'm alive, I can do whatever I want, God can just leave me alone. No, he can't. It doesn't work like that. It talks about in Paul in Athens, he's saying, this is in Acts 17, Paul says, God's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. And in verse 28, for in him we live and move and have our being. There's no life, There's no neutral space. There's no autonomy. We're not separated. We are in God. We are from God. He sustains us, so we cannot rebel yet. When we sin, we're not just breaking the rules. We're not just breaking these arbitrary rules that God set up. We're rebelling against the source of life itself.
You're rebelling against the one who created it.
Yes, and who keeps you alive every moment. It's like you're hooked up to one of those machines at the hospital that's keeping you breathing, and you want to cut it off. Okay, cut it off, but it's not gonna lead to any good outcome. So keeping that in mind. All right, and with that, I think we hit the time. Last thing, life is just the beginning. This life is just the beginning. We always forget too that very little is told to us about people's eternal destinies in the Bible. Okay, especially in the Old Testament. So we don't know. There's people who've been subject to divine judgment, or they've been part of communities who've been subjected to divine judgment. We're not told what happens to them afterwards. I don't know. But we know that heaven is a fundamental part of the Christian story, and we always keep in mind that I think of it like this. This life, as bad as it could be like a bad nightmare at some point. You wake up from a really bad nightmare, and it's terrible, and you wake up, and you're in the richest mansion anywhere, and all your family's around you, and you've got the best food, and you've got the young, healthy body of a 20-year-old. You're feeling good, right? That nightmare disappears. It's gone. Everything's great. That's a small glimpse of what it's like in heaven. You wake up, the former things are gone, and now you actually start the story. You got past the title cover, which was your whole life. Now the story goes on forever, and it's the good one where everything's fine and okay. You have to compare the suffering and the hardship of this life with that eternal glory. And I think we often forget that piece as well. But that's a fundamental part of our faith, and we can't just let that go. Okay. All right. I was going to say questions or comments, but we don't have time, so sorry. All right. Thank you guys for coming. Y'all have a good night. Yes, ma'am.